All right, good evening and welcome to all our virtual friends watching with us. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. Thank you. We have a great crowd with us in person and online to celebrate Tony Holland's brand new book, A Fractured Past, Out, Black and Gay in 1970s Atlanta. We're here with Tony on the left and Reverend Duncan Teague on the right to celebrate this exciting account of what it was like growing up a young Black gay man in the largest Southeastern city in the Bible Belt. Tonight's event is co-hosted by Abundant LUUv and the Counter Narrative Project. Abundant LUUv is a West End Unitarian Universalist congregation in Atlanta, and it is pastored by none other than the Reverend Duncan Teague. So I've asked him to say a bit about Abundant LUUv throughout tonight. And the Counter Narrative Project is, I don't know if anyone is here from the Counter Narrative Project tonight, so I'm going to speak to the CNP. Is anyone here? You want to speak to the CNP? What I'll just say, yes. What I will say is the Counter Narrative Project seeks to shift narratives about Black, gay, and queer men to change policy and improve lives. They stand in the tradition of Marlon Riggs, Essex Hemphill, Joseph Beam, James Baldwin, and Bayard Rustin. And so check out the Counter Narrative Project for folks who are watching online. I will drop links so that you can go look at their website, which is beautiful and amazing. And of course, we are holding up Charles Stevens, who is the brain trust behind the Counter Narrative Project, along with many, many others, Justin Smith, so many other people. So Reverend Duncan E. Teague is the founding minister of 3-year-old, but now it's older than that, 5-year-old. We need to update your bio. Abundant LUUv Unitarian Universalist congregation in Southwest Atlanta, Georgia, an African-American community. He has served on the UU Ministers Association's Committee on Anti-Racism, Anti-Oppression, and Multiculturalism. He can be seen as a guest presenter on Dr. Henry Louis Gates's The Black Church, This Is Our Story, This Is Our Song. He's a senior member of the Performance Poets, the Adoti Muse, a gay Negro ensemble. His narrative is featured in the award-winning book, a documentary and stage productions of Sweet Tea, an anthology of Black gay men's lives in the South by E. Patrick Johnson. He resides in Decatur, Georgia, with his longtime companion and husband, David Thurman, who is also with us tonight. Welcome, David. And the person of the hour is Tony Holland, who is a native of Georgia, Atlanta in particular, the youngest of 4 children. He spent much of his childhood with his head in a book. When not dreaming of faraway places and beautiful landscapes, the remainder of the time was spent learning to sew and design clothing. That remains his primary vocation today, though he has always been impassioned about art in any form. A Fractured Past, Out, Black, and Gay in 1970s Atlanta is his first published book, though he is currently working on a second book, a collection of short stories to be released by the end of the year. So I know folks are going to want to get right into it. I want to let folks know who are watching virtually that you can ask questions at any time, and we will work them into the conversation at the end. And if you are in the room with us, I will bring a microphone to you so that everyone can hear your questions when the time comes. But without further ado, please welcome Reverend Duncan Teague and Tony Holland.
Good evening. This is Reverend Duncan Teague, and I am so honored, first of all, to be in Charis Books and More. Charis is an institution in the Southeast, in the region around Atlanta, and in the women's community, but I'm going to claim a piece of Charis Books for Black gay men, because the space has been open and available and enriching and influencing for Black gay men as long as I have been in Atlanta. And I arrived as a small child in 1984. I'm going to reference that many times as we go into this amazing book of yours, Tony. I will also give a shout out back to the Counter Narrative. They have been extremely supportive of art, music, writing, and cultural shifts done by Black gay and bisexual and men who love men and Black men who just sometimes come on around. Anyway, howsoever they do it, there's a space for them at the Counter Narrative. Okay, if y'all are really patient and you really don't have a choice because I got the microphone, and I was brought up Baptist. But anyway, Tony agreed that I could do this. We are going to dedicate our time this evening in memory of somebody. And this someone is so woefully undercredited for their influence and their history and their love and their design and their work and their entertainment. And it's the late, absolutely great Tina DeVore. And I begged Tina to do something like this many times. Tina was actively performing in Atlanta 40 years?
Something like that, yes. Something like that.
And she makes it in Tony's story. So if you don't want to read anything but up to the point where Tina arrives in Tony's story, it's worth that. And I love Tina. She, as Tina, was always graceful, wonderful, and in her male persona was absolutely dedicated to the community and just stalwart. And I felt like this was an opportunity to raise her up a little bit. I can't wait till somebody writes her bio, and they got to hurry up and do it.
Yeah. I appreciate you bringing Tina and asking me about doing that tonight. I think it's a wonderful idea. Tina figured greatly into my life and into this book. I first met, who I will bounce back and forth between saying Tina and Cliff because I knew both people very, very well. Mm-hmm. I first met Tina in 76.
Oh my.
76, I think it was, when she first moved to Atlanta. She and Lady Chablis drove up from Florida.
Yes.
They came up in the same car. And we first met then when she was working at the Onyx Lounge downtown. Became friends and stayed friends from then on. So yes, that was my ride or die for a long time. Yeah.
If any of you have, I'm raising up Tina because we all got a Tina in our heads, and I hope you can remember somebody who is no longer with us physically, but still influences you. And if you'll pardon me, Tony, I'm trying to make a house coat. Ooh, excuse me.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. I've had things like that come.
I know you're not about to do what I think you're about to do.
Yes, I am. See, I have this fabric here, and I need a suggestion.
Oh Lord!
About,
here we go.
I'm gonna make a house coat out of it. What do you think I should? I was thinking about like y'all are all right? Anyway, because we both sew.
Okay.
And it comes up in the book.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So I'm thinking about a burnt orange facing, and then like the collar and the cuffs for a house coat. You can think about it.
Okay, I can think about it for a while. Okay. Yeah, I love the fabric.
I wasn't going to miss this opportunity. If I were serious about sewing, I would be 4th generation on my father's side. Wow. Sewing. My father's oldest sister got her husband by making him a suit. So if you don't have a partner, you might want to learn how to sew. Tony wants to read from his book, and then I'm going to ask him some questions.
Okay. All right. Well, as I told Duncan earlier, what I do is first off, thank you all for coming. I also want to thank Charis and give a little history. We were talking when I first got in. I can remember when I first came out that piece about my head being always in a book. There was another bookstore in town, and I became friends with the owners, and he packed up and left because, and this speaks to that time. It was 1975, and his store was over on 12th Street. And I remember I went in one day and he was very angry, and he was talking about leaving Atlanta, and he was getting rid of the store. And we were talking, and I said, "Why are you leaving? What is going on?" And he told me that he was just sick and tired of what he was being put through. He was trying to put his information in the yellow pages. And at that time, they would not let him mention that his bookstore carried gay and lesbian titles. He couldn't mention anything about being gay. He couldn't mention anything about the store, the nature of the store, or what have you. And he said, "That's it, I'm done. I can't advertise my business because I'm being shut out." And at that point, when he packed up and left, Charis was the only store in town where I could find books that were gay and lesbian books at the time. And I loved it because even though it was a feminist bookstore, they always had about 3 or 4 shelves that were there that were dedicated to us guys, you know? And later on, there was a little bit of controversy when another bookstore was about to open. And I said, "No, we have to support everybody." And they were here when nobody else was. Mm-hmm. So I thank you guys for that too. And if you were a little child, then I was but a preteen. Oh, those 15 years ago, those 50 years ago.
What are you going to read?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm supposed to be reading, aren't I? Okay.
Not reading.
not reading, but reading. Okay, yeah, I picked out a few sections. What I thought I would do is just to give you a little bit of kind of a light overview of the book, because the book covers a few periods in my life. Mm-hmm. I'm going to read a little bit about my life as a child in my family, and then I'll read a little bit about coming out and my family's my family's dealing with that. And then let's see.
That's good, because my first question is about something.
Okay, maybe I'll leave it at that. Okay. All right, I'm gonna start here reading on page 14. This references a period when I started out, when I started in elementary school here. It was during the time of busing. I was in the 6th grade when a lot of what was going on in the rest of the nation trickled down, and it was decided in the city of Atlanta that students had to go to a school in the neighborhood. This was the city's way of pleasing everybody. Students in the neighborhood had to go to a school that was in their community, and the only way that they could choose to go to a school outside of that community was that it had to be a school that was integrating. So my parents had moved from the community that they lived in when I was born and had moved into another community that was an upscale.
What were those communities?
I'm sorry. I lived over off in Southwest Atlanta. We grew up, my brother and I grew up over there close to Westview Cemetery, right off of Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. And then we moved to Crescendo Valley, which was a little bit further northwest from there, not very far, into the Collier Heights community. And Collier Heights was a more upscale African-American community. So this part of the book talks a little bit about that. So I'm just going to read now. Collier Heights Elementary was located in the northwest section of Atlanta, an area well known for its upper crust African-American families. There were many notable members of the Black community, of Black Atlanta society, who had kids amongst the student body. Of the 3 girls that I had befriended that first day, One was the niece of a prominent Atlanta developer, one the daughter of a prominent restaurant owner, and one the daughter of a gentleman who was rumored to have a rather dubious career that made him a lot of money, but shall we say not ensure the health of his family. I was still very much a sheltered child compared to these kids, and a lot of things about me reflected this. I mean, these three girls, for example, their conversations were about catching the bus and going out to Lenox Square and Phipps Plaza to shop at Neiman Marcus and Saks. Hell, I knew adults that didn't go there to shop. I doubt very many of them ever entered those doors. The fact that I still wanted to carry a lunchbox pretty much proved my immaturity. In my first school, this would not have seemed odd at all. But in this school, it was something that babies did. So when I showed up with my red, white, and blue lunchbox made like a mailbox with U.S. mail on it, they hooted. I remember going home and spray painting the top of the thing gray so that it would be less conspicuous. No matter what I did, I couldn't make a favorable impression with these kids. I was a very slow developing child, socially, but I was large for my age, but still very much an immature child in a lot of ways. And I know that now, but back then it was not easy. It was very, very hard. That year where I had to move, and I don't want to give away too much of what in that section. I want y'all to want to read the book. I don't want to tell you all of it. But that year was very hard, but I admire my parents for the decisions that they made around what I needed to do at that time, even though it was hard for me and it was hard for them. And the second part I will read talks about a little bit later with them. And it says, this is from chapter 4, starting on page 107. By now, my life had many definite conflicts of interest. At the time, I was still very much in the closet as far as the African-American community was concerned. My life was split into 3 distinct parts. There was my work life at the hotel. I was working for the Marriott Hotel downtown. My home life and my social life. I was still convinced that no one in my home life knew that I was gay, and that was just the way I liked it. But just as in any situation where ideas conflict, my conscience started to get the better of me, and the guilt started to creep in. I noticed it right off in my civic life. I had been an active member of the NAACP Youth Council during the latter part of my high school years, and very much enjoyed the experience. However, I began to notice there were conflicts that would just tear me apart. I loved being a part of something that I felt could possibly change the world for the better, but at the same time, the organization had come out in force in opposition to the idea of a Gay Pride Day celebration in Atlanta, which at the time was in its infancy. While I would dare not go and participate for fear of being recognized, it was a hot topic, then being covered widely in the press. I just could not bring myself to continue working with this group, knowing what they must think of me and my kind. Meanwhile, either members of the organization didn't know or couldn't admit that I and many others like me were in their midst. In fact, the very first closed-door same-sex orgy I was invited to participate in was actually held at a hotel during an NAACP convention. I guess I better quit right there. Okay. And if you want to know the rest of it, you got to read the book.
What did I tell you?
Okay.
Nice.
It's not pornography, it's just blood.
I did.
Okay.
I'll remind our folks online that was Tony Holland reading from his book, A Fractured Past. I sound like I'm on NPR, don't I?
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yes, Terry.
Oh, don't you dare. Anyway, my first question is about what I kept reading along and fascinated by, given my family's history with sewing and making things. My cousin, who is 80, still is sewing. And she's been sewing since she was right out of high school. So she's very proficient, maybe as proficient as you, I'm not sure. And so it's watching her do that has influenced me a lot. I'd love to see you at your sewing machine and see who that Tony is. But I kept wondering, because you were making some fairly elaborate costumes and living at home, and I kept wondering, where is he sewing these things? Could you answer that question?
Yes. I was talking, and it's funny because I was talking with somebody about that not too long ago. I used to sew late night because I lived at home for a long time. I didn't leave my parents' house until I was 20, I think I was 20 or 21 when I finally moved out. So my bedroom was downstairs in the basement, and I would wait until 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning after everybody else went to sleep, and then I would sew. That was what I would sew.
They had to hear that very specific noise of.
They lived upstairs. I lived downstairs in the basement.
So you don't think they heard you?
Oh, they knew I sewed. My mother taught me to sew.
Oh, it was your mother?
Yeah, my mother taught me to sew. They didn't know what I was sewing, but they knew I was sewing.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's funny because I laugh about that. I was talking with somebody not too long ago talking about perfectionism. And I'm self-taught. Most of what I know, I either learned myself or my mother taught me the fundamentals. And then I self-taught until, believe it or not, till I started going to the bars. And then there were people that were in the bars, like I'll mention a couple of names: Ernesto Perez, who used to do the windows for J.P. Allen, and a couple of other stores around town. There was George Abrute, who still lives in South Florida to this day. I think you probably know George. These people were working in the bars, and they were doing costumes, and William Carpenter, alias Crystal Lumbasia. These people took me under their wing. Crystal Lumbasia. When I first met Crystal moved from from Knoxville to Atlanta. And Crystal went to Massey Business School, who learned garment construction and fashion design and runway, and was one of the most talented people that I've ever known. A fabulous makeup artist, wonderful at doing clothes. Crystal was one of the first people that I ever met who you could take a garment and turn it inside out and you couldn't tell that it was not store-bought. His talent was that good. My first paid job was because he had a contract with the theater is gone now. It was the Dinner Theater in Marietta, the Barn Dinner Theater. And he had a contract with them doing the costumes for A Midsummer Night's Dream. And he had more work than he could do with the show, with that show, doing the clothes for the drag shows and doing his own clothes. He had more work than he could do. So he gave me part of that contract, and that was my first paid job.
Wow.
Yeah.
Y'all, if you buy the book, which you're going to do, I'll take ministerial privilege. I know at Charis where you have consent and right and everything. Not tonight. Anyway, you go through the book and you have long passages of history of Atlanta. And what I love about it is rich, involved queer history before HIV.
Yes.
We had a full, developed, thriving community here before HIV. And I love you for giving us not just your story, but the story of Atlanta. And so to me, Atlanta becomes a co-character in your book. Was that deliberate?
Yes and no. Atlanta, I have no life without Atlanta.
Oh, wow.
Atlanta was my whole life.
Okay.
You know, that was my beginning. That was what shaped me. That was what taught me. This was it. This was it. Everything that I am now, the foundation came from Atlanta. So this was my only point of reference. I love to read, but at that time I hadn't traveled. I hadn't done anything. So quite naturally, Atlanta was going to become a part of it, was going to be a character in the book, because it was really my only point of reference.
Wow. Did you, it doesn't appear as though you thought about leaving, but did you?
Not for a long time. Not
Okay.
for a long time.
And what does that mean? Because you have folks online who are listening,
Okay.
and they can't see your beautiful white goatee,
Oh, okay.
you know,
Okay.
telling us that a long time was a long time.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I know I sound about 15 or 20. No, in order to answer that question, I have to give you a little bit of history and about Atlanta. When I came out in 1975, Atlanta was the place to go.
Yes,
And
it was.
I talk a little bit about this in the book. If you look at Atlanta geographically, this is the largest city, and it was the most happening city going in any direction.
Yes.
You had to go to South Florida. You had to go all the way down to South Florida before you found another city going that way that was that had what we called a happening gay community. If you were going north, you really didn't come across anything until you got up around Chicago, New York, up through there. So all of these states right around here, Alabama, North Florida, the Carolinas, Georgia, Tennessee, all of those, oops, this is lethal. All of those kids funneled into Atlanta because this is where they could find an active gay life. So there wasn't, I can remember my best friend and I, Greg, we used to talk about the fact that there was no need to leave Atlanta because everything was coming to Atlanta.
Yes.
You know, so we stayed. So we were more than happy to stay in Atlanta at that time.
And I'll have to admit that in 1984,
Mm-hmm.
And you came out before I did, technically. I just want that on the record. Because I was very young too when I came out, but you beat me.
Oh, okay.
I came here in August of '84, and in 2 weeks I had something like a boyfriend, and there was no way I was going back to Kansas City. No way. There's no way. Brian loved me. This is when I can insert a story for you.
Okay.
Because you did something for me also in the first part of the book. And that's that I'm going to get emotional because it meant a lot to me. I was out in Kansas City, but I didn't go to drag shows. And I know we had them. We had the Jewel Box on Main Street. I don't think there's anything left of that yet. But I didn't go there, and I didn't have friends who went to them. But my third night in Atlanta, on Monday night, on the corner of Peachtree and 10th, was Illusion. You know what I'm about to say?
I spent a lot of time on the corner of Peachtree and 10th in Illusions. Yeah,
and
I know exactly what
and
you're
Monday
talking
night
about.
was a black night. the entire show is black.
Monday Night Madness.
Monday Night Madness. And the one queen I remembered, and by the way, I thought when we arrived, it was much earlier in the evening. And this is about your book, not mine. But when we arrived, it was, it was a few people in the bar, nothing big. And what I was used to as a Black gay man in a bar. Mm-hmm. About that many people, some scattered at the bar, some about to dance, maybe. People walking in, typically tall men with garment bags. I now know those were drag queens. And then my cousin's boyfriend, Dwight, said, we need to get a table. And so we got a table so we could see the show. And y'all, it looked like at one particular hour, the buses arrived. Mm-hmm. And the buses didn't arrive. People just came. And they came, and they came, and they came. and I wasn't accustomed to being in a crowded bar with a full stage and dance floor. And all of the people around me were Black.
Now I'm going to interject and tell you how Monday Night Madness started. Monday Night Madness was a mistake. Monday Night Madness, the way Monday Night Madness started was the bars were open on Monday night, and I'll give a little bit more reference and a few more props here. Okay. Ted Binkley and Ray Ferris opened Illusions. John Austin, who had been the famed manager over at the Sweet Gum Head, went to work for Illusions. And Monday night was the dead night. That was the night where nothing was happening in town. So Ray and Ted were like, okay, what can we do to bring people into the bar on Monday nights? Okay, we know what we'll do. We'll have cheap drinks. We'll have cheap well drinks. And we'll open the show up. We'll give the regular cast the night off. And we'll allow independent entertainers to come in from around town and entertain. And with the cheap well drinks, the kids will come and they'll come for the drinks and they'll see a good show. Well, what happened at the time was, and I credit Ray and Ted with this, was because just like the bars weren't really doing any business, drag is theater. It's just like any other theater. Yeah. And even in Broadway, the theaters are dark a lot of times on Monday night. So Monday night, people are just coming off of Sunday and going back to work on Monday, so there's nothing for them to do. So a lot of the entertainers wouldn't have any work to do either. So we started putting together shows for Monday night because, people still had rent to pay. Yeah. So they thought, okay, there's a bar open. We got a ready-made crowd. And so we'll go in and we'll do a show on Monday nights. And because it was a cheap night, the Black kids flocked.
Yes,
to the club.
Did. Oh my God.
Ray and Ted recognized that the audience was mostly the Black kids. So they started bringing in entertainers that the Black kids liked. And if you remember, Bertha Butt was performing at the time.
Yeah.
The shows were open to anybody who wanted to do it. I did a few Monday Night Madness spots myself, did a concert there. I was doing Sylvester as a character at the time. Tina and Crystal and I did a show called Three Dark Divas. And that show, it was such a huge show until they called us back to do a second show. But I made good money doing Monday Night Madness. Well, it became crazy.
I want you to know that you might have performed at the Monday night of my first drag show in Atlanta.
Oh.
And the reason I know this happened is because I didn't remember you per se, and or
I tried to keep the two people separate.
Yes, you did.
Tony and Adrian were not the same person.
But there was a little sparrow of a dancer who I never got over, Yativa Antoinette.
Yeah.
And you put her in the book.
Yeah.
And I read that. I'm getting emotional now.
Those were my buddies. Those were my buddies. That was my family, you have your birth family and then you have your built family.
Yes.
And Tina and Yativa and Chablis and Bertha, and that was my family. That was my buddies. You know, we ran together when we worked together. We ran together when we were not working. Those were my peeps.
Yativa, y'all could dance better than Janet Jackson.
You know,
To Janet Jackson's music. And I know I'm gonna hear response on my Facebook
you're gonna hear all of that.
But I'm not lying. First of all, she was so skinny she could wear off the rack, and I'm not bitter about that. But she was amazing.
Yeah.
I had never seen drag, so I really was trying to figure out, is there a boy in there?
Yeah. Yativa chopped up a lot of people when she first moved to Atlanta. She moved from Daytona, and there was also a lot of politics in bar life, y'all. You know,
really?
Yeah, like any other profession, there was politics.
Wherever there are 2 or 3 gathered,
right? There were people who felt like you needed to earn your stripes.
Yes.
Before you could carry a city crown or before you could carry a national title.
Yes.
Or any of that. So there were entertainers that had entered contests for years and never been able to win. Yativa danced into Atlanta, the youngest person ever to win Miss Gay Atlanta on the first try.
They didn't like her.
Oh, they didn't like her at all. They didn't like her at all. They were evil.
And that came with a cash prize.
Of course, all of them did. You know, that's the other thing. You know, I when I talk about drag or female impersonation, I like to stipulate to people, a lot of times people don't realize that that's a business. And there's a place in the book where I talk about the fact, and believe me when I tell you, I didn't get as far along doing drag as a lot of people in this city did. I always maintained a full-time job, but there's a place in the book where I talk about the fact that at one point, just doing drag on the weekends, I was making more money doing drag than I was making on my own job. So, you know, what started off as a lark and a dare by a friend became big business.
Yes.
It supported, in a lot of ways, it supported me when I decided to move out of my parents' home. It certainly helped me as far as becoming a designer and doing garment construction. Like I say, I started talking earlier about the people in the bars who I did kind of an apprenticeship with Ernesto and with George and with Crystal. You know, watching them and learning from them. And at one point, Crystal lived upstairs from me. And I would say, well, how do you do this? And I would go to them, and Tasha Wallace, I don't want to leave out Tasha.
Yeah.
Tasha Wallace, I would say, how do you do this? And they would show me how to do it. They would take me and say, no, this is the way. The way I learned how to cut a full circle dress was with a drag queen, you know, because I didn't know how to do that. So these were things, this was what I learned doing shows. And it was a business. Somebody who's still working today, let me give a shout out because I know she's going to hear this. Charlie Brown was the person who taught me how to put my booking calendar together. And Charlie is still working today. Yes. If you get a chance to go see her show, she is at the Eagle on Saturday nights. But Charlie was the person who taught me how to put a booking calendar together. Charlie and Chablis were the first 2 people that I saw who treated drag like a business.
Like a business. Yeah.
I can remember, I saw long stretches where neither of them worked for a bar, but they always had work.
Yes.
And what it was Charlie taught me, she said, okay, when you go to Macon and you go to work, then while you're in Macon, look at your calendar, see where you're going next, talk to the people at the bar and tell them when you can come back from Macon. Then you go to Macon, you leave Macon, you go to Savannah,
yes.
You go to Chattanooga, then you leave Chattanooga, then you go to Greenville, then you leave Greenville, and then you go up to Knoxville. And by that time, it's time to go back to Macon. So you can work all year and not have a full-time job. and still pay you. So people look at it and they think it's just putting on a wig and putting on a dress and moving your mouth to a record. No, it's a business.
Yes.
Yeah.
Speaking of drag,
Okay.
in light of where we are now
Okay.
and the crap,
Mm.
ER, can we curse at Charis? Oh, the bullshit going on now. And that's the sacred use of the word bullshit if you're offended by a minister using language like that. Because I know Isaiah cursed. We have people writing into the law hatred of trans people and making it illegal to do your job as a drag queen or a person in drag performing. Y'all, I make a distinction there. We don't have to go through that, do we? That a trans person is living out their identity. A drag queen wants a check, baby.
Pretty much.
At least I did. And a tip, and more than $1. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've heard. Do you have something to say about this predicament we're in now?
Yeah. Of course. First off, let me say this is not new. This is not new. When I started doing shows, it was 1978. I just mentioned Macon, Georgia. I can remember the first time I worked in Macon, one of the things that they told me was that there are laws on the books where you cannot appear in public in female attire unless you have on 3 articles of male clothes. And I know by the time I quit doing shows, it was 85, and that law was still on the books. So what's going on is not new. This has been going on for a long time. What I think is very different
Can I speak to that for just a moment? Can you imagine getting dressed for work and there's a law that tells you what you need to have on? Now, actually, for women, there were laws.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all couldn't show up at work with pants on.
Right.
Now, I'm very young, but I heard about that.
Yeah.
So it's not just drag. This oppression around gender and around identity,
yes,
it's horrible. And to think that we are leaning into fascism, if not already dancing it.
Right. And the whole idea of how bad it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. I've seen some pretty rocky times and some rough things over the years. There is a situation that I talk about in the book that happened very early on when I started doing drag, and it was, I can laugh about it now, but it was horrifying at the time.
I'm gonna name the prop. Are you talking about the park bench?
Yes.
Okay, you
yes.
cannot give that away.
The park bench. Okay, I won't give that away.
I won't let it. No, you gotta read that. It's amazing.
But it changed the way that I went about work from then on.
Mm-hmm.
It changed everything about the way I approached working on stage, because it was horrifying. And I know many entertainers who have similar stories. But anyway, so let's move on. And I won't talk anymore about that.
There are things I'm not going to let you give away.
Okay.
Because if you give it away, they'll never buy it, baby. That's what I heard. That's what I heard. I don't know where I heard stuff like that. Is there something or someone who got cut in the editing that you have the opportunity now to tell us about?
Oh my God. What I will say is this. Before this book was edited, if I had put it out just like it was, it would have been this thick. You know? So it's gone through many, many edits. there's not, I can't think of any one person that I edited out of the book that I intended to write about. No, I can't think of anybody.
So you held the people who were really close to you, and they kept in the book, even if their stories got edited down.
Basically, because what the book, as I said earlier, the book started off as journals.
Yeah.
So the people who were the closest around me were the people who ended up showing up in the book. One of the things that I regret is that, well, as far as I know, I mean, I don't know whether she did or whether she didn't, is that Tina never got to read the book. I don't think Tina ever got to read the book. However, she is referenced in the book. We lost Tina. It would be 4 years ago, because I had goodness. And the bad part about it was 4 years ago or 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years. I remember it was in September, may have been 2 years ago, because I had come home. I was in Atlanta when Tina died, even though I didn't get a chance to see her.
Those who are listening, we're talking about Tina DeVore.
I was in the car with my friend Daniel, and we were riding down Ponce, and my telephone rang.
Uh-oh.
And I answered the phone, and a mutual friend of ours, Michael, who lives in Philadelphia now. This is how far-reaching Tina's reach was. People all over the country came in to celebrate Tina's life when she died. But my phone rang, and I answered the phone, and it was Michael. And I was like, "Hi, how are you?" He said, "I'm fine. How are you? Where are you?" I said, "I'm in Atlanta." He said, "Did you hear about Tina?" And I said, well, "Don't tell me." Because, these days when somebody starts with that, you know what's coming. And he said, "Yeah, I just heard that she died earlier today." And that, it was surreal. I mean, it was surreal. I was only in town for a few days, or I think maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks or something like that. But I had to leave before the funeral. But yeah, when the day she died, I was in Atlanta. We hadn't talked in a while. We had talked, it had been, as a matter of fact, she was going to Las Vegas for the Miss Gay America pageant. We had talked, that was in September when she died. We had talked around February, because I said, well, we're going out later in the year because we're planning on looking at places out there to live. And she said, oh, and that's when she told me, oh, I'm going to Las Vegas for Miss America. I said, well, maybe we'll be out there at the same time. But that was the last time we talked. Yeah.
The book, of course, cannot avoid the epidemic of HIV and AIDS.
That's true.
And then you are bold enough, and I thank you as a survivor, to come out about being a prostate cancer survivor. Why did you do that?
Several reasons. One, because of I believe that if you talk about things, you take the power away from them. One of the things that I promised myself when I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and to this day, I don't write cancer with a large C. I always write it with a small c. I won't give it that kind of power. I've known too many people to struggle, too many people to suffer, too many people to fight to give it that power. I have a family member right now that's fighting with cancer. When I was diagnosed, I was young. I was pretty young. I was just about to turn 50. I was in 49 when I was diagnosed. And like most people, I was shocked. I was like, oh my God, this is an old man's disease. What am I doing with prostate cancer? When I went to the doctor and he gave me my diagnosis, that was the last thing in the world I expected to hear him say. And fortunately, the doctor that I had that's his life's work. He has worked very hard to get the message out about prostate cancer. And he told me, he said, Tony, not only are men being, for years we thought of it as an old man's disease. Men are being diagnosed much earlier now.
Mhm.
And on top of that, African American men are being diagnosed at a larger rate than white men and other races. So,
Well, Tony, let me correct you.
okay.
We're being diagnosed at the same rate as white men and dying twice as fast.
Okay. So, and the other thing, this was very interesting, even after the diagnosis and the treatment, because I think once I got the information, I walked into it with my eyes open and tried to walk into it with my mind open and say, okay, how can I deal with this? Or what's the best way for me to deal with this? And to continue to thrive and to continue to live.
Mhm.
And the only way I can do that is to meet it head on and to be objective about it. Talk about it, learn as much as I can about it. My doctor did a couple of information panels, and there is a book that's out where his patients were interviewed. And please don't ask me the name of the book because I can't remember it. I'll have to get it for you.
Please get it to me.
I'll get it for you. But I agreed to be interviewed in that book. Several of his patients did, and it's the stories of men who have walked through that disease. But what was so interesting was once I got into treatment and once I started dealing with it, I found all this information about if you're diagnosed with prostate cancer and you want to have children. I found all this information about if you're diagnosed with prostate cancer and you want to have children, you can freeze your sperm and you can have children. How to talk to your wife about prostate cancer, how to talk to your kids about prostate cancer. There was not one word that I could find that was directed at gay men for prostate cancer. Since that time, I found a Yahoo group online that, because we as gay men are living older now.
That's what I've heard.
And so now I have a few friends that have been diagnosed with prostate cancer. But back at that time, I couldn't find one word that was directed toward gay men about prostate cancer. So I was like, okay, well, you got a voice, say what you need to say.
Thank you.
And see if you can get it out there. My very first fashion show here in Atlanta was a nod to prostate cancer. It was called Blue Motion Explosion. Yeah.
We've got to get the word out, especially to African American men, that this is not your great grandfather's prostate cancer.
Nope.
The treatment options are different. And it's no picnic, and don't get me wrong, but we don't have to die from it at twice the rate of our white brothers.
Right.
We don't. I know this intelligent audience seated here and online has questions, and I'm sure ER is looking at me like, if you don't shut up,
wrap it up.
Never.
Do we have a question or two online, or do they want to really know what my age is?
They're taking you at your word.
Okay, thank you.
But for our folks who are here, does anybody want to start us out with a question?
Okay.
I just kind of want to know what
Do
you're
you
right.
want to tell us who you are?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm anonymous. No, my name is Tanja. I just want to know, what is your writing process? Because you were talking about being self-taught as someone sewing, but you are also, would you consider yourself taught as an author? And so I guess I want to know, what is your process around being an author?
Thank you. Yeah, I kind of consider myself self-taught that way too. I have always loved books. I've always loved to read. The reason that I wrote this book in the style that it's written is that I kind of mimicked what I've always seen. I loved reading novels. So even though this is a memoir, it has a prologue and old person moment. It starts off with a prologue and it has an epilogue. And I wanted to write it sort of like a story, like I was talking to people. And that was why I wrote it the way that I wrote it. Now, as far as the process is concerned, one of the things that I learned from garment construction and design, as an artist, I only have about maybe 3.5 hours in my tank. Okay. Once I get to 3.5 hours or 4 hours, I'm burnt out.
Wow.
So I do, and then so I'll work for 3.5 to 4 hours, and then I'll put it down. And I found that works well for me with writing too. I'll sit down and I'll write for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, then I walk away from it. Now, the difference between making clothes and writing the books, what I found is this. Sometimes the book will chain me to the chair, because if I get up and walk away, even though I've hit that 2-hour period or whatever's going on in my head, I will have lost when I come back, because I don't like outlines. The first that I did this book with an outline, and it about drove me crazy. So I was like, no, this does not work for me. Interesting, the book that I'm writing now, it's fiction. So even more so, I have to stick with it when a thought comes, because, you know, if I get up and walk away from it, then a lot of times it's gone.
Is there one aspect of 70s gay Atlanta, if you could import one aspect to our contemporary moment, is there something you would bring forward?
Oh my gosh, that's kind of a difficult question. Import a moment from the 70s and bring it forward. There is one that's personal to me. I notice a lot of gay men now traveling in groups. And as the interesting thing about our community, and I've said this time and time again, we are the first out gay people to make it to senior citizenhood. You know, I'm sure there were plenty of.
Cut the tape, please.
There were plenty. Let me explain that statement.
Oh, you meant that as an eye statement. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So you stumbled into some talcum powder on the way in here. That's what all that white is on your head. No. There have always been gay and lesbian people. But in earlier years, I guess we went back in the closet, or we married straight people and we hid out or what have you. But now we have a community, and I hope that younger gay and lesbian and LGBT people will do this. Utilize us. Ask us what it was like. Ask us our opinion about things. Because I don't know about none of the rest of y'all, but this is the first time I ever saw 60s. You know, inside of me lives a 20 or 30-year-old. So it's interesting. I think that the concept, what I'm seeing now is, getting back to your original question, what would I import? I love traveling from the moment I started traveling. And what I'm seeing amongst my friends and everybody else, even those that are not coupled or are not married, they're getting together in groups and they're beginning to travel. The world is huge and it's wonderful, and it's a lot out there to see. So I think that, you know, years ago we were accused of having disposable income. I don't know about that. I never had none. but take that and go out and explore the world and see what there is out there. I talk about my education in the book. One of the things that I always felt that I was limited in was that because of my own internalized homophobia, I did not go as far in school as I may have liked to have gone. But the world became my encyclopedia, because when I did start to travel, I started to learn things that I did not get a chance to learn in the classroom, just by jumping on planes and going and seeing for myself.
Oh, brings me to a question
Okay.
that, because our lives are on very similar parallel tracks. Y'all were Methodists, we were Baptists. Your folks freaked out, mine freaked out. Anyway, but Tony, I always considered college an escape, and you did not. At least according to the way I read it. Maybe you implied that more than I thought. But I took a year out of college, and the world around me went crazy because they were afraid that as a Black man, if I dropped out of college, and I didn't drop out, I stopped out, and with every intention of going back, and I did. And I didn't hear a voice saying, Tony, please go to college. I didn't hear that. And that was all around me. And you were pretty academically sound until some things happened. I'm curious about that voice from the Black community, your auntie or uncle or somebody who let Tony get away with not pursuing college. That sounded different to me.
Okay. Whew, you asked me earlier if there was any place I didn't want to go. I'll go here.
You can go there any way you want.
And I will. I'll go here, and I will. And I want to explain this. I want to make sure that I explain this very clearly. I was the forgotten child. My parents had 4 children. I had 2 sisters that were much, much older than me. My brother was 3 years older than me. So to use my brother's terminology, I was a oops baby. Okay. Oh. I was an oops baby. So, and over the years, what I found is from other children who held that position in the family, that often we are the forgotten children because they've worked so hard to raise those others until by the time they get to us, they kind of let us do whatever the hell we want to, even if we didn't want to do it that way, you know? So they saw early on that I was not as academically inclined as my brother. I was not an A student, I was a C student. And so I think in a lot of ways, they were just happy to get me to year 12. I really do. I really believe that. So there was no push to have me go to college or to do that. And quite frankly, I was very glad of that because school was so traumatic for me until I was ready to walk away rather than put myself through that hell. I saw it as torture. And the thought of going for 4 more, when they told me that I had a choice whether I had to go for 4 more years, I was like, bye, Rita. I'm done with this. No, seriously, it was very traumatic, and it took me many, many years to decide to go back into any kind of an educational environment. That's what that was. But
so for me, what was escape for you was complete hell.
It was.
Okay.
It was. That transition in elementary school messed me up. And it was years before I could even see that. Wow. But it did a number on my head. It really, really did. So, and then at the same time, 2 to 3 years after that, trying to begin to come into my sexuality.
Yes.
And all of that, I was like, no.
And this is the difference between you and I. At 15, you looked 20, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
And at 15, I looked 12.
Okay.
And so there was no sneaking around or whatever. When I graduated from college, my mother got cards that said, congratulations from high school.
And on the flip side of that, I started going to bars in the city at 16, and I never once got carded.
I was
Never once.
I was carded at the grocery store, but anyway. Okay, she was blind. Anyway. Are there any questions in the audience? Our esteemed audience.
Sure.
Let me bring this seat.
Oh.
I can talk loud.
It's otherwise it won't get picked up.
I think what I'm really enjoying hearing about is like how Atlanta has changed over the years. And I think I've sort of a two-part question. I think one thing I would love to know is like, what is the most striking difference that you see between like Atlanta now and in the past, particularly for the queer community? And then also, is there anything in Atlanta that may not have been around then or was around then that you look at and you're like, well, damn, not much has changed?
Oh, wow. You know, interesting question. As far as the queer community in Atlanta, it is totally different now from what it was when I was here. Computers have changed everything. Let me start there. Our social nucleus was the bars. You know, that was it. And it was amazing to me because I pretty much pulled out of the bars and stopped going to the bars in the early 90s. And then a friend of mine, who I had known for many, many years, asked me to go out with him. And for like 2 or 3, I'd say maybe about a month, I went out with him on the weekends, and I was completely and totally surprised. Bars were everything to us. I mean, that was our social hub. That's where we went to meet each other. That's where we went for dates. That's where we went for our entertainment, all of that. The whole dating scene and everything now is online. You know, nobody even goes to the bar. I went to very popular at the time. It's closed and gone now, but I went to a very popular gay bar here, and they were having a bachelorette party. You know, it was straight girls, you know, there for their, you know, getting ready to, what is it, when they're getting ready to get married, they have the hens night. Yeah. And I was like, really? You know, there are no men in here. And that, you know, so that, what I learned in just that short period of time of going out with my friend was that the whole social construct of the bars had changed. Now you had gay and lesbian kids who were going out in groups with their friends, and it was straight kids and gay kids and trans kids, and everybody was partying together. When I was out, you know, even the gay community was segmented. You know, the leather boys went to the leather bar, the lesbians went to the lesbian bar, you know, drag queens went to the drag bar. You know, it was very segmented. So yeah, that's very different.
I want to answer your question sort of statistically, and I see your hand. One of the things that you want to keep in mind is that the Atlanta that Tony grew up in has been completely swallowed.
Yes.
And I don't mean that in a pornographic way. Tony grew up in an Atlanta that was not 1 million people. Mm-mm. When I got to Atlanta in 1984, we were waiting on 1 carload so that we could make it to 2 million. The metropolitan area of Atlanta now is 6 million people. 6 million people. There are parts of Atlanta that were completely undeveloped when Tony was born. There was nothing there. And 100 years ago, Lawrenceville Highway was a dirt road. Scott Boulevard was a dirt road because a 90-something-year-old woman told me. So Atlanta has grown bigger and better in some ways than some cities that have existed since the country formed in 50 years. And I've only been here part of that.
I'd like to hear you talk maybe sort of on the same theme about the segregation in the 70s. And, you know, I think that the drag bar, Sweet Gumhead, and places like that were a little bit more mixed in the gender segregation too. Lesbian bars, gay men's, white gay men's bars, which are really big. And but very segregated, and they had, they had door policies that were racist, and that has changed a lot. I mean, I think the integration you see on the streets of Atlanta, racial integration, chosen racial integration is a lot greater than it was, but it was. I'd just like to hear you talk about some of that in the 70s and maybe the 60s.
And it's in the book.
Yeah, there is some of that in the book.
Don't give it away then.
No. Oh, there's plenty that's not in the book. No, I tried to be objective, and I tried to kind of stay in the middle of the road and not go too far in any direction, but just give an example here or there. Part of the period that you're talking about, I can almost name, when I first came out, I can almost count on my hands the number of Black kids that would go into the bars, here on the northeast side of town. And we all knew each other because it was maybe 10 or 12 of us. That back at that time, it was a pretty dark period. There were bars I'm going to put it like this: the gay community was kind of the Wild West. Nobody wanted to call the cops in for any reason, so a lot of the bars did what they did, and you had no recourse. There were bars that would charge $2 for white kids to get in, and $10 for Black kids to get in. There were bars that would ask Black kids for 3 pieces of ID, picture ID. I don't know anybody today that carries 3 pieces of picture ID. Right. Oh yeah, the membership thing. There was a period where, they got in trouble about all the carding and all the door policies that were rough. So they started doing memberships, and you could buy a 30-day membership for $1, $2. What that allowed them to do was to become private clubs. So then they could say who could come in and who couldn't come in. So there was that kind of stuff going on. I remember one time I visited a friend in New Orleans, and he worked at the Bourbon Pub and Parade Disco. And I was there to visit him for 2 weeks. And so we were running around, and we would go into the Bourbon Pub. At the time, we're talking the late 70s, early 80s. The Bourbon Pub was one of the most popular bars on the Strip there in New Orleans. And every time we would go in and out the door, now he worked in the bar, and every time we would go in and out the door, the guy at the door would card me. And I looked at him one day, or one time we were going in and out, and I turned to my friend and I said, I'll be so goddamn glad when he stopped asking me for my ID. He just saw me 10 minutes ago, and that kind of thing would happen on a regular basis. It was rough. It was rough. Go ahead.
I did have a question just to kind of continue the conversation about bars, and I came in a little later. I'm not sure if you talk about this in the book at all, but speaking about how bars were your social hub and talking internally about some of the relationships and things that were going on externally, did it still feel like a safe space? I know now, like today in contemporary time, we have terrorist attacks basically on gay bars and clubs. And so did it feel like a safe space within? Was there, were people aware that these were gay bars? Was there ever harassment? And could you touch on that?
Thank you for that question. It's hard to try to keep everything in your mind. I have told gay men and lesbians that I know now, I'm from a period where there were no gay flags hanging around. There was a time when every bar that you went to was either, and this was in Atlanta, they were either down in a hole, they were behind another building, or they were an unmarked door. I'm sure there's one person I see sitting here that I know from those days. We've talked about the fact that we've seen each other for years. I'm sure you can remember that the Gumhead was located behind another building. It was like Tiger Auto Parts on the front, and the bar was in the back. And then you had to, and unless you knew to go around the building, you didn't even know there was another business back there.
That street's name wasn't. That's pretty telling.
Right.
On the back street and the street doors out on the Peachtree, they were exit doors.
They were
You got
unmarked.
bounced out of the club, they threw you out that way.
Exactly.
And they had door policy.
Yeah, I talk about some of those in the book too.
Yeah.
But another story. No, there was another club called Mother's. I remember the first time I went to Mother's, this is what I mean about bars being down in a hole. It was right there on Peachtree Street, but if you didn't know it was there, you would never find it. You know where Bennett Street is on Peachtree, that down that hill? The bar was down that hill at the back of some warehouses. So, we had an internal network. We had magazines. We had a lot of the publications that were around. Oh my God, years of publications. There's a page on Facebook now, and I'm not somebody who pushes Facebook all the time, but there's a page on Facebook that I always tell people, if you want to know about old gay Atlanta, it's called. You've seen that page. You were in Atlanta. I'm trying to remember you. You've lived in Atlanta a long time, if you remember so and so. There's also a gay page like that. You've lived in gay Atlanta a long time. It has a lot of pictures and a lot of information from the 70s and the 80s and even further back than that. Yeah, so you might want to check that out.
I was going to say that, what do I want to, the carding thing, and also a transition, because as we became more organized and more active and more involved in our own liberation, things did change, and they changed really quickly. They changed so quickly that society is having the backlash that they're having now.
Right.
And so when I was here in the 80s and early 90s, before we accepted the nightmare of HIV, there were bars along Peachtree Street with marquees on Peachtree Street and doors on Peachtree Street. From 14th, certainly, all the way down to what was the other side. And Bulldogs has the property on Peachtree, and they're still there because the guy who owns Bulldogs owns the dirt it's sitting on.
Yep.
We got moved out as the real estate went up in Midtown, but they couldn't move him because he owned the land.
Yeah.
But his front door wasn't on Peachtree.
His front door, it wasn't,
No.
but now
Exactly.
it is. Now it is.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, that was also true for the lesbian bars. I don't want to speak out of turn.
Garbo's was hidden on Cheshire Bridge.
Yeah.
The Tower Lounge was pretty hidden.
Oh yeah, it
Yeah,
was
most
hidden
of-
in the neighborhood. Even.
Yeah, most of them
Tower
were.
was back
They
on
were
Ralph
not.
McGill.
Yeah, they were not out and proud on the streets at all.
Now there were some black clubs, and that was the same thing. The entrance was, but like oppressed groups know how to. We know how to get the word out to where you are, right? Yeah, like ask the black folks where the juke joint was.
They can tell you in Los Angeles where to go.
Yes. That was the other thing. Everybody knew where to go, and you also knew who to ask.
I'll speak to that too. That was really funny and it was a surprise to me when I first started traveling how small the world is as far as the gay community. Because when I started traveling, I would run into people I would run into people in DC that I had originally met in Fort Lauderdale, that kind of thing, because the community was so very, very concentrated. And there was a lot of information dispersed that way. I knew this person who knew this person who knew this person who knew this person who knew this person.
Yes.
That kind of thing.
Because before we had the internet, we had telequeen.
Did we? Did we?
Oh, Charis Books was one of those places.
Yes.
Listen, women used to come here to buy a book. Y'all know couples that have been together 45 and 50 years. They met right over by that. Oh, when they were in 5 Points.
Little 5 Points.
Y'all met at Charis, didn't you? No, I'm not gonna do that. I shouldn't do that. I'm sorry.
Question.
Okay.
As someone who grew up gay in the Northeast, in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area, we were always out.
Yes.
Nothing was hidden. Nobody got carded. We were free for the most part, which was wonderful. So I'm wondering, you talk about what you experienced here. Did any of that change when Maynard Jackson became the first Black mayor of Atlanta? Did the Black gay community feel at all empowered to go to this man that you all helped put in office and demand some changes?
Let me speak to that. I'm glad you asked that question because I was very involved in the bars at the time. Maynard was caught in the middle of a lot of stuff. Maynard was being pulled in a lot of different directions. He spoke as well as he could in defense of the bars. He showed up at functions. He did the best that he could to include and not get himself shut out. That's, that he walked a fine line, and I think he did a wonderful job because it was very, very, very difficult at that time. Much of the system, the racist system that was in place in Atlanta did not go away. It went underground. I was really kind of surprised to see, if you go down to the Human Rights Museum downtown, they actually talk openly about when King won the Nobel Prize and the difficulty that he was being lauded all over the world, and people here in Atlanta didn't want to give him a celebration dinner after he won that award. So there was a lot of old boy network and a lot of racism that was behind the scenes directing traffic. Okay, Maynard did as much as he could possibly do, and probably not be pulled apart.
And also, like you're sort of his second term, I was here, and I'm going to make it a juxtaposition to show you how the progress we have. Mayor Andre Dickens has a staff person who is gay. You can call the mayor's liaison to the LGBTQ ... community. He is on staff, and he has events in City Hall. That's progress. Maynard had 3 volunteer queer advisors, openly known. Maury Well, the late great Joan Garner, who became the first lesbian Fulton County Commissioner, and who was the third person?
Was it Gil Robbins? It may have been Gil.
Would they have dared? No, they would. No, they wouldn't have had Gil.
You don't think so?
Gil was too dangerous.
I know Gil was.
Gil Robinson was out, openly involved, ran for city council.
All I remember.
I mean, way before the queer community was ready for Gil.
Yeah.
And I love him, and he was one of my ex's dear friends. He came out of the radical left, so he was ready to face anything. But literally, he was way out ahead of the community. Yeah. But it was somebody else. But Maury and Joan, and one of the progressive things that happened when Joan died of cancer, I did Joan's funeral at Ebenezer. with Senator Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock on the dais for open Black lesbians. So that's the progress we've made. We also had another mayor who I will not name out of respect for him and his legacy. But he said out loud, and he's Black, and he worked in the civil rights movement. Oops, Duncan. That he didn't know how you could say gay and pride in the same sentence.
Yeah.
And this is somebody who had to work with queer people, because if you're in Atlanta and if you do anything of significance, you have to work with queer people.
Well, and right now, you know, just because you got representation don't mean they're moving in the right interests of all queer people
Exactly.
in Atlanta.
That's true.
You know,
Exactly.
that's the other problem, is we've got some representational diversity, but
Yeah.
they're not actually necessarily working for us right now, which is painful, in my opinion. So we have had such a wonderful conversation, and I want to make sure we have time to sign books and let folks have a little one-on-one with you.
Okay.
So I want to say goodnight to our friends who are watching virtually.
Thank you for coming in virtually.
Yes, there
Yeah.
are many folks who are so appreciative of this conversation and saying hi and showing their love in the chat. So we are going to say goodnight to them. Thank you
There
so
weren't any
much.
questions online.
No questions, but they are watching and loving it.